Altoona, Pennsylvania is one of the largest cities in the central part of the Keystone State. While never a major city, it would be quite consequential in the state's history due to its location and impact on the logistics of Pennsylvania. Though it was once quite a prosperous city, over time it has experienced losses to such an extent that it is now close to half the size that it once was. This is what happened to Altoona, Pennsylvania. What would become Altoona, Pennsylvania was originally just a construction site for something else entirely. Where Altoona would be built was near a major natural barrier in central Pennsylvania, the Allegheny Ridge. This ridge made it so that neither train nor canal could completely make it across Pennsylvania, but rather canal boats, when reaching the ridge, would have to be physically carried on an incline railway over the ridge to continue on, just so that supplies was able to get across the state. The solution? A complicated hairpin turn made by the new Pennsylvania Railroad, which would become known as the Horseshoe Curve. This curve's development, which would vastly improve transit times between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, would be the basis of Altoona, which was established in 1849. Without this, there may have never been an Altoona to begin with. Over time, the city would become a rail center due to this construction feat, and its population would reflect as such after the line's opening in 1854. From 1860 to 1880, the city would grow by a factor of nearly 6 times over, and would continue on with solid growth for many decades after. With the Pennsylvania rail line now being able to go across the state, much supporting industry would be needed for the Pennsylvania Railroad. This would be in the form of train manufacturing, repair, and maintenance, along with other associated industry, in what would become known as the Altoona Works. In fact, rail-related industry was so popular in Altoona that the Pennsylvania Railroad was responsible for more than 80% of the city's employment at one point. In the mid-1920s, 14,000 were working for the Pennsylvania Railroad in Altoona. And while the city would have other smaller industries in food and manufactured goods, nothing would compare to the rails. The city would swell to its highest population of just over 82,000 in 1930, and while it would see some small losses in the following 20 years, its population would remain relatively stable. From 1950 forward, though, that would begin to really change. It would be around this time that a major product of Altoona, the steam locomotive, would be rendered obsolete. Rather than converting production in Altoona to their replacements, which were now being powered by electricity and diesel, production of locomotives would simply cease. On top of this, in 1940, around 30 miles south of Altoona, the first portion of the Pennsylvania Turnpike was completed, which, with expansions over time, would offer quicker and quicker access across Pennsylvania. This road, which now crosses the entire state from east to west, would open its first portion 16 years before the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. With the Interstate Highway Act, rails would be rendered less important than ever before, especially with passenger traffic. And by 1970, Pennsylvania would have a new interstate crossing the entire state in I-80, toll-free. And it would be that same year that the Pennsylvania Railroad would go bankrupt. Altoona from 1950 forward would see major population declines, which have continued through today. Altoona would lose around 9 to 10% of its population every decade from 1950 to 1990. It was so connected with the rails that once they lost favor, nothing was going to save it. And it wasn't on or right by either of the main state crossing highways in Pennsylvania. With it being over 30 miles away from both, most of the new cross-state highway traffic wouldn't be passing through or need to. Altoona wouldn't even have a freeway period until the 1990s, when much of the population was already lost. Nor was it close enough to a larger city like Pittsburgh to be a commuter town. The few rail jobs that remain have slowly been chipped away over the years, with the loss of a freight car plant in nearby Hollidaysburg in 2002 costing 400 jobs, and Norfolk Southern having layoffs at the Altoona Works in more recent years. Today, only a few hundred rail jobs remain in this once great rail city. The population today of Altoona is just under 43,000, meaning it is roughly half of what it once was. In fact, rail isn't even a top 10 employer in the county Altoona is in, and today it is mostly a service-based economy. Altoona did have one major company in Sheetz gas stations come into the fold throughout the later half of the 20th century, which is a company that succeeds to this day and is the second largest employer in the county. So what happened to Altoona? Most of its entire existence centered around the railroads. It very well may not have existed at all if it weren't for them. Once that declined and volumes were not what they once were, there really was no other industry to turn to, as the local steel and coal industries were doing no better, with nearby cities such as Johnstown and Pittsburgh seeing their own major population and industrial declines around the same time. Couple that with a location that was not easily accessible to the major state-crossing highways, and this city was no doubt going to see major losses. It almost certainly will never be what it was, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And today it exists as a smaller city with a ton of history in central Pennsylvania. Thank you for watching.